From Akron, Ohio. I grew up impoverished. That's the only way I can describe it. I began to live a dual life in high school. So I had this kind of civil, what looked like a gentlemanly kind of existence on the one hand, but on the other hand,
Kind of thuggish.
oh, I was sluggish as a mud. I have a call to ministry, to proclamation of the gospel. I want to go to seminary.
In 3, 2, 1. Thanks so much for joining us on Seeds of Awakening. My name is Amani channel. Make sure you subscribe, like, and hit the notification bell if you like this kind of content. We're here for the free thinkers and the spiritual minded folks. And they have a special guest with us. Let me bring him in. He's Dr. Mark Lomax. Morning, Dr. Lomax. How you doing?
Well, how are you this morning, Amani?
I'm doing good. So you're the pastor of the First African Presbyterian Church in Lithonia.
That's
We're
correct.
here to talk to you about your journey, your life. And let's get started by talking about where you're from and how you were raised specifically.
From Akron, Ohio. That's where I was born and raised. At that time, it was known as the rubber capital of the world. Working class town at that time, I think it was about 240, 250,000 residents. I grew up impoverished. That's the only way I can describe it. In the north side of Akron in a place called the Bottoms. And that really was geographically correct. You had to go up a hill to get out of that community. But that's where I was shaped and formed. I was shaped and formed through Bryan School, which is a historically Black elementary school. Of course, I'm old enough to have experienced at least the latter part of segregation. And then by the Culver Street Church of God, which is the church my mother attended, and we were required to attend every single solitary week unless we were about dead.
Unless you were sick unless you were very sick. I gotcha.
Yeah.
So when you say that you were raised in poverty, sort of explain what that was for you.
What that was for me was we lived first on a place called Howard Street, which is right off the main strip, like you would find in any urban community. This is where all the action was, the bars, the gambling, the prostitutes, the pimps, all that. Then we moved on up a little bit. We moved into a home about 2 blocks away from Howard Street on Turner Street. The house on Turner Street was a permanent shelter, and it had maybe 3 bedrooms for the 8 of us who lived in it. We had coal furnace that we couldn't afford to put coal in, and oftentimes in the wintertime there was sub-zero temperatures, and when the wind blew, you see the curtains move on the inside of the house, so it was freezing. We ate beans of some sort just about every night. We were always well fed, but just the choices weren't very broad. We had hand-me-downs until we could afford to buy our own clothes. So it was poverty in that sense. The whole community lived like that, but we made it, and we didn't know we were impoverished until we got a chance to get outside of the community and see, alternates. Of course, the people on the hill, which were white Italian people, they lived at a different level of socioeconomic of the socioeconomic strata. So we saw that, but we never thought, at least I never thought, that was really attainable to those of us who were in the bottom. But yet the good story is, and the true story is, that people came out of the bottom strong. Some of the best leaders in Akron, and again, and indeed around the state of Ohio, came out of the Akron, Ohio bottoms. Because there the elders took our education well, not just our academic education, but our social education very seriously. They involved us in scouting and sports and any number of different activities. I mean, if your parents were amenable and you were amenable, you had an opportunity to really build character and build a life. And many of us did that. Many of us took advantage of those opportunities.
So how did you take yourself from the bottom to where you are now? What was your path?
It was circuitous. I was one of those kind of rebellious children, rambunctious children. But when I went to the 4th grade, they decided to put me in an integrated class of 4th and 6th graders. And I think that's where the journey began, really. I mean, I didn't know whether to think of that as an honor or some kind of punishment, to be honest with you, at the time. But the opportunity to engage with a more serious, more mature children at the time really began to inspire me to think. I've always been an avid reader. My mother insisted that we go to the library every week, and in the summer we were required to read books upon books upon books. Couldn't afford much, but we had encyclopedias in the home. And so that's where the intellectual journey began. But that's also where I began to think, I think more seriously about who I am in the world. By the time I was 13, I was a hard-headed kid. One of my dad, well, my siblings used to call me Daddy's little black angel. I couldn't do no wrong in my daddy's sight. He saw me as most like him. And my father was a hard-working man, worked 3 jobs, had 8 children. He provided for us, but he was also a drunk. And when he got drunk, he was very, very mean. And he always, I mean, just about every weekend, would beat my mother. Right. So that was formation. That was formative. I remember times of sheer terror living in that household. And I don't remember many times of sheer joy. And so what I knew was I wanted to get out of the bottoms. And so I took opportunities that came my way. My mother got me and my 2 younger siblings involved in Boy Scouts. I rose to the ranks of an Eagle Scout within the Boy Scouts. I joined something called the Naval Cadets, United States Naval Cadets as an Explorer Scout. And that set me on a path. The captain, I can't remember his name right now. One day he looked at me and he says, "You're destined for leadership. I want you to become a United States naval officer." I don't know what he saw. I certainly wasn't feeling what he was saying, but that was inspiring. And then, I played football from the time I was 6 years old. I skipped a bantamweight, but I played pee wee ball and I skipped bantam, and I played ball in high school. I was a wide receiver. I mean, I'm sorry, I was a safety, a defensive safety in football, and then went on to college to become a wide receiver and a track man, and then I began to live a dual life in high school. On the one hand, I was successful, relatively successful in the classroom and on the football field. On the other hand, at night, I became another person. I got involved in the drug subculture, sometimes as a petty dealer, other times just as a user. Got involved in what was gang banging then. There's nothing like what gang banging is now. In fact, the guys with whom I hung in high school, by the time I got out of college, they were all dead. Except
Was
for
this in Akron? Was this in Ohio?
This was Akron, Ohio. Yeah.
Okay.
You got to think about Akron as the Akron, Canton, Cleveland neighborhood. I mean, it's like Atlanta's a metro area. That's a kind of a metro. Akron, Canton, Cleveland, Youngstown, Barberton. It was kind of a metro area. So it was hot and popping. Even back then. In college, I went to Heidelberg College and was invited to start thinking for myself. Heidelberg College was a private, but overwhelming majority white. When I entered Heidelberg College, it had 8 African Americans, and is located in a town called Tiffin. At that time, it only had 1 Black family. And so very, very isolated. But it was an opportunity to think critically. I was a poli-sci major, and it was an opportunity to begin to think critically and critically about the world we're in, to engage in conversations about that. And that was also where I began to do some deep reading as a consequence of some religious courses and some history courses, some deep historical reading about things like the Reformation that took place in Europe in the 16th century. Things about the revivalist movement that took place in the latter part of the 19th, early part of the 20th century in the United States, and how they impacted, political thinking at the time and then going forward. And with my background at the Coburn Street Church of God, playing in the back of my mind is Jesus coming soon, Jesus coming soon. So my life was really out of sync with Jesus ever coming at that juncture of my life, because I was a real mad party kind of person. And I was very successful on the track in particular, not so much in football. I mean, I started every year as a college football player from the freshman year to my senior year. And I actually broke records in 200 meters like crazy and got invited and placed in the nationals 3 years in a row. But that was Division III. Got invited to some invitationals where we competed at higher levels and all that kind of stuff. So I had this kind of civil what looked like a gentlemanly kind of existence on the one hand, but on the other hand,
Kind of thuggish,
oh, I was sluggish as a mud.
right? Gotcha. So how did you end up getting into theology?
Yeah. That's the question I was looking for. One year, I think it was in 1977. I was preparing for the National Indoor Track Championships. And as a consequence, I had to stay on campus to train. And I was smoking a blunt, what they call a blunt now. And I had some Jamaican red
Can
blood.
you explain what that involved? The old school blunts?
Old school blunts, they weren't really blunts. It was just a joint, really. You just, old school paper, you roll it. But it was kind of thick because I was on the campus, in the dorm, basically by myself, with the exception of the help. And I was at the same time reading the Gospel of John. And now why I was reading the Gospel of John, I don't even remember. But in the Gospel of John, John 3:16, God so loved the world that God gave God's only begotten Son, that whosoever believeth. And for some reason, when you highlight that, you keep on reading the same old stuff over and over and you kind of get stuck. And God so loved the world, God so loved, and it kind of sunk in. And the teaching and the preaching at Colburn Street began to connect. And so I got the message in my spirit that God loved me. And that was a profoundly important lesson. So long story short, when people started coming back on campus, I started telling everybody I was going to get saved. And people cussed me out, literally cussed me out because I wasn't the saving kind of dude, man.
Right.
That wasn't who I was. But I was serious. I thought that the revelation I received in my dorm room getting high that day was transformative.
Was divinely inspired.
Was divinely inspired. And so on March 13th, 1977, I did. I walked the aisle. I went home to Colbert Street. Well, I went home on the night before I went to Kent State. I got as high as a brother can get at Kent State. I drank everything you could drink. I smoked everything you could smoke. And I snorted as much as my body could handle.
Oh my gosh. You're really living large.
Yes, I literally stumbled into church.
Okay.
On that
Was
day.
was this the last time you ever did drugs?
It was, absolutely.
Okay.
That day was transformative for me. I don't know what the brother preached about that morning. His name was Elder Price. And he was the new pastor at Colbert Street. And I walked the aisle, and as I walked the aisle, something happened in me. For the first time, and I don't know when, I began to cry as I walked that aisle. By the time I got up there to the front and shook his hand, I was indeed a new person from the inside out. That's when I knew that God was real. I mean, something happened. I was set free from the fears of being rejected by my friends, the fear of what I'm going to do if I take this path, the fear of what might happen to me if Jesus does in fact come. I was set free of all those fears. And for the first time in my life, I felt renewed. I felt inspired. I felt strong, at a deep level. I was always strong physically, because I was an athlete, I was a college athlete. I was trained hard. I was strong physically, but now I was strong spiritually and emotionally. And my first step was to go back down to Howard Street and to Charles Street, out there where the people were hanging out that I knew that were my people really. I told them I got saved. They said, nigga, get out of here. You ain't got no say.
They didn't believe you.
Talking mess, man. You have me. But I was. I mean, and so that was the day. That step was important because I divorced myself from that community of people that kept me involved in that street life. And I was confident too, prior to that street life was going to take me down. I had a dream. And in that dream, I think I heard God say, you have a choice. You could be a leader for good or you could be a leader for evil. Because everybody agreed I was a leader. I mean, I was the president of the pre-law club. I was the president of the Black Student Union. I was the captain of the track team and the football team. I wasn't no Christian, but I was president of the Fellowship of Christian Athletes. I mean, the leadership thing was there.
Was already doing it, yeah.
I was already doing it. So are you going to make a decision to be a leader for God or a leader for the devil? That's how I interpreted that. And I decided to be a leader for God. So that was the spiritual transformation piece for me.
So then you ended up going to theology school, I take it?
After seminary, I was actually in pre-law. I wanted to go to law school.
Okay.
And I had joined the United States Marine Corps officer candidate school program because that was the way I was going to pay my way through law school, actually.
Mm-hmm.
And that all broke down. I went to two summer camps, 6 weeks each, of UMC training, UMC officer training. And then everybody was begging me to focus on the Olympics because I had actually run a good enough time in the 200 meters to qualify. And I decided and insisted on playing football. For the first time in my whole life, in the fourth game of that football game, for the first time, I had suffered a serious injury, an ACL injury. Took football and the hope of becoming a JAG in the United States Marine Corps away from me.
Mm-hmm.
And my whole life was turned upside down.
I tell my son all the time that in sports you can get injured like that and that'll change your whole life.
Yeah, it changed my whole life. It really did. And you know, I mean, I had supporters. You know, I mean, people who were supporting me on the down low. I could drive wherever I wanted to drive, call whoever I wanted to, because I had supporters. All that went away, man. All that went away. And so, not immediately, but it became clear that people loved me before what I could do, not for who I am. That became very clear. And so in January 1978, I got married for the first time. And sister lived in Blacksburg, Virginia. She was teaching at Virginia Tech, teaching reading at Virginia Tech. Went to Virginia Tech to stay with her for that month-long break that we used to get in the winter every year from Heidelberg. I didn't graduate until May of 1978. During that month, I literally fasted and prayed for 30 days.
Wow.
8 hours a day, I read the word.
Mm-hmm.
I didn't just read, man. It wasn't like I just sat down and read. I studied. I had a Schofield Bible. I read all the footnotes. I took copious notes in the margins and on pieces of paper, trying to understand this thing called Christianity, not as institution, but what it means to be a Christian, and understand the text through which this notion of Christianity has come to us, at least as a primary source, right? Started to really drill down into that. And in the midst of that, fasting and praying and studying, another transformation happened. I believe I heard God say, through both dreams and visions, audibly and visually, go preach. And in fact, I think it was a passage out of Isaiah 53, which I no longer remember. I can't quote it off the top of my head right now, but gave me some insight into what that meant for me. So it was a mix of a proclamation with social justice. My wife at the time had started this group called the Gospel Experience on the campus of Virginia Tech. It was a singing group. And oftentimes, well, eventually it got to the place where they would, as before they sang, I would preach, or after they sang, I would preach, or really teach. I wasn't really characterizing myself as a preacher there. Graduated from Heidelberg, still hadn't made it known to my pastor that I was a preacher. Couldn't find a reasonable job. Nobody wanted to believe in Blacksburg, Virginia, that a black man had graduated from a school like Heidelberg. Private all-white school. They would sit me down. Who was the dean? Robert Oles. Who was the president? Tell them the name of the president. Who was on the board? You know, as a student, you don't typically know the names of board members. But I did, because I was president of the Black Student Union, right? And so I interacted with these people. But still couldn't get a job better than working at Arby's. And I kept on praying and doing the study, doing the research, and finally I told my pastor, Reverend William F. Beamer, at the Wake Forest United Holy Church, that the Lord had called me to preach. Literally the day after I told him that, prospective employers began to call me. Doors just flew open. I decided that I wanted to move back to Ohio. My ex-wife said no. She's ex. She said no. Because, I mean, she had her thing going to Gospel Experience, but I had this thing, this kind of macho idea that a man needs to be able to take care of his family. under no circumstances should the burden of that weight be placed on the shoulders of the woman alone. So I drove up to Ohio. I interviewed with Clifford Tyree of the Youth Services Bureau. During the interview, Clifford asked me, he said, so is this all you want to do? I mean, what is your 5-year plan? I said, no. I mean, I have a call to ministry, to the proclamation of the gospel. I want to go to seminary. I want to go learn. I want to go learn what it means to be a preacher. I don't want to be a jackleg. I want to be an educated brother, right? He said, "Oh well, I'm on the board of Trinity Lutheran Seminary. Are you interested?" I said, "Yes." He said, "Well, if I could make it such that, because we're recruiting African Americans, and if I could make it such that you could come to school for free, and I let you off to go to school, would you do it?" I said, "Can you put that in writing?" He said, "Yeah." I said, "Well, I can't become a Lutheran. I mean, I'm holiness. At that time, I joined the Gospel Tabernacle United Holy. I'm holiness. I don't think I do Lutheran. I can't swing incense down the aisle and wear albs and stuff." He said, "Don't worry about it. No, we're looking for African American Christians. And if after 3 or 4 years, it's a 4-year seminary. If after 4 years you decide you don't want to do something else, then do something else." So Cliff Tyree, bless his name, was the one to open the door for me to go to seminary for free. Of course, I had to do the work. And it was a rigorous institution. It's associated with Capital University, another private school. It was in the same athletic conference as Heidelberg in Columbus, Ohio. And I fought my way through. I decided to master in the biblical languages, Hebrew, Greek, Aramaic. Of course, along with that came a little bit of Latin and some theological French. And during that time, I was offered the opportunity to go on and do doctoral studies at Princeton, but my wife at the time nixed it, so I didn't do that, and I have regretted that ever since. But it set me on a path. While I was at Trinity, I was introduced to by Rudolph Featherstone, who is a professor there, African American professor, real radical brother. I love Rudy to death. Because Rudy spoke my language. He had that mixture of street and intellect also, you know what I'm saying?
So you related to him?
Yeah, brother.
Yeah.
We used to kick it hard, man. He said, "Man, why you reading all these white theologians and all these white biblical scholars, man? That shit ain't no good." His words, not mine, just quoting.
It's all
He
good.
he said, "Man, you're an African dude. Look at you, man. You're a black dude. You African. Man, you need to be introduced to the man." So introduced me, long story short, to Black Liberation Theology, James Cone et al., and to Malifi Asante's work, Afrocentricity. Malifi had just crafted that book, his first text called Afrocentricity, which I couldn't read initially because of the concepts were so, in my judgment, anti-Christian.
Revolutionary, yeah.
Yeah, anti-Christian. That's
okay.
So it pushed me back for about 4 or 5 years, but I came back to it. But the liberation
It
theology.
sounds like you just weren't ready to receive his perspectives at the time. Was that what it was?
Yeah.
Okay.
I wasn't ready for it. I couldn't accept it. Anything that was anti. Let me put it to you in the real. Whatever was with anti-white Christ,
right,
anti-white evangelicalism, whatever was anti-white period, I couldn't do it. I met another brother who was one of my wife's friends. I can't remember his first name, but his last name was Walker. But he taught at Columbia in the theology department. I think it was at Columbia. I'm not real sure about that. But anyhow, he also pushed me in the direction of James Cone, J.D. Otis Roberts, Gay Rod Wilmore, in the direction of their work. And so I started reading. I always, like I said earlier, I've always been a voracious reader. So I started reading his text. And all of a sudden, a profoundly African or Black hermeneutic began to emerge in my consciousness, a Black way of not only seeing the world, but of interpreting not just the text of Scripture, but the text of our common lives. That began to emerge in me. And as that began to emerge, I also picked up Malifi Asante's work again, because I thought that Black liberation theology did not go far enough. When you say liberation, that means that somebody has control, and you're trying to get free of someone else's control. The question that arose in my young mind at that point Well, how do you get to the place where you are the initiator and not the responder? Malifi Asante had that answer. Now you frame everything around you and your peoples, around your experience, because your experiences are legitimate, around your thought processes, because what the Spirit drops into your heart is as legitimate as what Spirit might drop into anybody else's heart, into your history, your cultures, your spiritualities, to center yourself, self not in the individualistic sense, but in the broader cultural and communal sense. Begin to center that and let that become the lens through which you view the world. Wow, that was it, brother. That was the bomb diggity right there. And that's where I began. That's where I began this work called Afrocentric Christian Ministry.
So tell me about how that led you to create the first African Presbyterian church. I'm not familiar with, like I was raised Jehovah's Witness, so I'm not familiar with how all the denominations are different, but explain what that means and why did you form the church?
Well, I was actually pastoring another church at West Hills Presbyterian Church right here in Atlanta. West Hill was a older member congregation, but we did bang up ministry there. We had a soup kitchen that fed 500 people a week. We had a clothing closet. We partnered with organizations. We had drug treatment program in that church. It was a 30,000 square foot building. The Nation of Islam had a temple in that church that we shared in our chapel. We did a whole lot of very, very good work through that ministry, but the members fought against it tooth and nail. And I wasn't mature enough to manage that level of conflict. So I internalized the conflict in that congregation, and I got very, very ill. In fact, I had a heart attack at 38 years old. And coming out of that experience, I told the congregation, I think maybe a week or two later, after my service, said, Jesus paid it all. I don't have to. I'm done. I'm gonna take my month's vacation. I'm not coming back. And at that time, I was broken because ministry, pastoral ministry, was what I found compelling. So I went home and I sat on my couch wondering about my next steps. Brother named Floyd Rose, who was executive, one of the executive presbyters of Greater Atlanta Presbyterian, called me. And he said, Mark, I want you to think about doing a new church to develop. I said, man, look, I'm done with ministry. If this is the way church people act, I want nothing to do with it. I want to deal with human beings, not demons. And he said, well, no, not everybody's like, but this is a new church. You get a chance to start your new thing. And in long story short, I did the interview for this new church development. I was hired almost on site. There's a whole story behind that I won't go into now. And my first step, it was an empty building, 5197 Salem Road in Lithonia, which is East Atlanta. Lithonia, Georgia is now called Stonecrest. There was just a building. The previous congregation that had been there since 1881 dissolved its charter in 1991. And I was asked to start a new church in that new spot. And when the white people who had been members of that church forever found out that a black person and maybe black people were coming to that church, they came and took everything they could out of that church. Communion tables, organ, pews that their families had done. They took everything. Some of them brought it back later, but they took everything. And so I just began to ask the community because there was nobody. There was nothing there but a building. And so how do you start a new church? A church is a ecclesia. It means the called out ones. Right? That's what that word means. And what does it mean for a black person to be a Presbyterian? Now, Presbyterian means a congregation that is ruled by elders, not led by pastor. It's ruled by elders. It's Presbyterian. It's different from the Baptist in that the Baptist church, has is a congregational structure, and the congregation makes the decisions for the future of the church. In the Presbyterian church, it's the elders who make the decision. Congregation makes a decision in terms of who the pastor is, but not the direction of the church. In the Methodist church, it's the deacon board that makes that decision, right? Makes those decisions about the forward movement of the church. In the Presbyterian church, though, the elders are the ones in whom power is lodged for policy, program, budget, etc. Pastor has influence. The power the pastor has is to preach and teach. Influence.
Ask, how did you end up in Atlanta in the first place?
In our denomination, the Presbyterian Church, it functions a lot like corporate America. When when they're hiring pastors. Colleagues of mine within the Presbyterian denomination found out, were called and told that there was a vacant congregation, pastoral vacancy in the congregation in Atlanta. They thought I would be a good fit. I was at that time pastoring a small congregation in Davidson, North Carolina.
So you're already in the South then, it sounds like.
I was already in the South. After
Okay.
graduating from seminary, I took the call to Davidson Presbyterian Church in Davidson, North Carolina. I wanted to get into an urban environment, and Atlanta, the Rest Hills Presbyterian Church in Atlanta offered that urban environment. And because of the programs that they had doing, I saw the opportunity to expand some of those programs and to really begin to make a difference in ways that I envisioned this marriage between social justice and mission and theology. And so West Hills Church offered that opportunity. And so, yeah, when they made the call and we were able to sit down at the table and negotiate a fair salary and fair benefits package, I said yes.
Okay. So you were in Atlanta, you were at a church that had been stripped of all its accessories, it sounds like, because it was a white congregation.
No, it was 100% Black congregation.
Oh, okay.
In my judgment, they had a white mentality. That's
Gotcha.
not unusual for Black Presbyterians, brother.
Gotcha.
Yeah. And it wasn't so much that, to be honest with you, it was that they didn't have a heart to serve the community.
Mm-hmm.
There were those in the congregation that did, because they were key to sustaining the programs that exist, but there were others who fought against it. I mean, just like crazy. And
you were very much for serving the community at that time. You were, like, that's what you were about at that time.
I've always been about that business.
Okay.
I think the churches that fail to serve their community are not really churches that stand within the Black religious tradition.
Mm-hmm.
Churches that are all about the pastor, or all about the people, and all about the praise, and not ever about the service and the welfare of the other. I think they have missed the mark of what it means to be a Black Christian.
So how did you turn that congregation around? What did you do to help change that mentality?
Didn't change. I left.
Oh, okay.
It was an uphill battle. As I said, there was a lot of internal conflict in that congregation. That internal conflict started before I got there, and it lasted long after I left. In fact, I'm preaching the 70th anniversary for that congregation next month. And now they're down to just about nothing in terms of membership. Lost the building long ago.
And that's here in Lithonia? That's in Lithonia?
I'm sorry?
That's the congregation in Lithonia?
No, that's the one in Atlanta.
Okay, gotcha.
In Lithonia, I'm continuing to pastor right now. This is my last few months of the pastor. I'm retiring at the end of the year.
Oh, congratulations.
Thank you.
So how did you end up building up that church?
Okay, so yeah, that's the story we were on. How do you start a church was a question. I had family members, wife and brother, sister-in-law. We sat down and started thinking and talking and praying together about how you get something like this going. And it occurred to us that because they were working full-time jobs, need to get into the community and discover what people were looking for in a church. And that's what I did. There's a couple of things that I heard, very important things. Number one, at the top of the list, parking. People wanted to have a place to park their vehicles. Not anything about God, not anything about spiritual nurture, not about singing and preaching, parking. Second thing, they wanted programming for children. They wanted, talking to younger people my age at that time. I was 41, I think. They wanted programming for children. They wanted culturally relevant worship and culturally relevant preaching. Now, everybody has a different idea about what that really is, but they didn't want preaching to be devoid of Black, quote unquote, Black identity. They wanted to be connected to Black culture in some way. So the songs ought to reflect, gospel music, Black gospel music as one example, right? The preaching, you ought to address contemporary issues from a Black perspective in your preaching. Right down my alley. I was hearing those kinds of things though. So those became kind of like the pillars And then people started pushing me. So when is this church meeting? I mean, when don't y'all worship? At that point, we had no set time of worship. So we set the third Sunday in April 1993. And, 72 people showed up. That's unheard of. And as people came in, we had no choir or anything like that. We tried to sing congregational hymns, but I was careful only to invite people who did not belong to a church already.
Mm-hmm.
I didn't want anybody who had church experiences who belonged to somebody else's church. I wanted people who didn't know anything about God or as little about God, the Bible, whatever, as they possibly could. I wanted a clean slate, if you will. I didn't want to bring some other preacher's baggage or some other congregation's baggage into this newly forming congregation. And I wanted to reach deeply into the African world, man. Not just people who were interested in being followers of Jesus, but I wanted followers of Allah. I wanted Black nationalists. I wanted LGBTQAI people. I wanted a community of African people who begin to think together about what it means to be a spiritual community.
Okay. It's a little bit different from the traditional church then.
Yeah, man. Well, truthfully, if you go back and look at the history of the development of the Black church in North America, it's always been different.
Mm-hmm.
It's always been different. It was really at the later part of the 19th century that Black pastors and preachers began to turn the ship of the Black church toward the West in terms of institutionalized European religion. Prior to that, the Black church was an underground radical organization seeking the freedom for its people. Mm-hmm. And it spoke freedom language, and it did freedom things. In the latter part of the 19th century, we began to compromise that urgency to get to a place called freedom. Because what freedom looked like in the mind of some of those leaders, what freedom looked like was being white. To having what white men had, mm-hmm. being able to do and go what white men did and went. That wasn't ever freedom for me.
Right.
In fact, my mama told me that when I was a baby, I would ask her from the time I was able to talk, where am I from? She said, well, you came from me. No, where am I from? I kept on asking, well, we live in Akron. No. Where am I from? And then one day she said, well, our people come from Africa. She said I was 3 years old. From that moment forth, according to my mother, who's now dead, she died in 2012 at 96. She said, I never asked the question again. There was something in my being mm-hmm. that told me who I was. And as a child, obviously at 3, you don't have any idea, but the rhythm and the vibration of that word,
you knew,
was the answer.
Mm-hmm.
Was the answer that I was looking for. Now, I remember nothing of this. This is my mother told me. So yeah, I wanted something that was reflective of that essence right there. And I didn't know how to get there, but I found 12 people in that first gathering. I said, so I need somebody to help me to think about what it means to form a new church. Are you interested? It was random. Mm-hmm. I wanted equal numbers of men and women. I wanted as close to equal as I could get to older and younger and youth. So 12 people reflecting the demographic that showed up that Sunday. And we met every Tuesday night. And we thought about and we prayed about what it meant. And we listened carefully to the communities that we had access to in terms of what they wanted in ministry. Now, at the same time, I got into a Doctor of Ministry program. The same time this was going on, I got into a doctorate program at Trinity United Seminary in Dayton, Ohio. I got into that program because they had just Jeremiah Wright, Gay Rod Wilmore, Paul Rope. I mean, not Paul. Oh man, I can see his face. Can't call his name. But his last name was Roberson. Samuel J. DeWitt Proctor, other noted Black preachers from around the country, noted in the sense of theologians, preachers, historians. I mean, people who I was reading when I was in school, right? Formed this new seminary just to train Black minister leadership for the 21st century. I wanted in. I got in. Was able to study with J. Rod Wilmore, who did work with James Cone. These brothers were the ones knocking at the door of liberation theology and opening it up for us younger scholars who are the second and third generation of liberation theologians. And I had the opportunity, the distinct honor of studying with Dr. Wilmore. And so I began to think deeply now. I have this academic piece coming in, and I have this communal, collective, social piece coming in. And so we began to knit together what a new church might look like if we grounded it not only in scripture, but grounded it also in culture, and grounded it in social activism. What happens when you put that kind of compound together? It sounds like it's gonna be bomb diggity. That's what it sounds like, brother. It sounds like it's gonna be bang.
So what ended up happening?
That's what ended up happening.
All right.
And by the second Sunday of December, we had 140 people, and we chartered under the name of First African Church. We deleted the Presbyterian piece because Black people don't know what Presbyterian is.
That's what I was
they know
wondering.
what church is. So it's First African Church. We spell African with a K because in most African languages there is no C. There's no hard C sound. So it's not a K sound using a C. So we switched it to a K. That's the pure sophomoric description of why we did that. And I mean, it's been on the Pulpit ever since. At our height, we were about 1,400 members, almost $1 million budget. I have to say that at this juncture, following COVID and some things that went down in my personal life, we are at an all-time low in terms of attendance and membership. Yet, you know, we've been able to sustain ourselves. I mean, we've done, because of our online ministry, 70% of our income comes from online. We've been doing a bang-up job. But what we have done, what I have done as the lead pastor, as a senior pastor, we've trained 66 other pastors that are serving all kinds of denominations all over the country and the world. Not only congregations, but also institutions. Some of them are presidents of institutions, academic and otherwise. Others of them are in pastoral care, and some of them are leading pastoral care organizations around the country. Some are in the military, and they have risen to the ranks of majors and colonels. So I'm real proud of those 66. We're working on 67 to 68 right now. We were very, very activist for about 20 years, and when I was helping to provide leadership to activist organizations here in Atlanta, Georgia. And we continue to be activists now, but we are activists in different ways. We have a Caribbean ministry, particularly for an example, who supports works in Haiti and in Jamaica and in Guyana. And we still do political forums where we invite people running for office to come in, or people who are in office come in and be challenged by the community on their policies and programs, and be informed by the community about what we feel is important and what we feel needs to happen with our support. So we still activists in that sense, but nowhere near like it used to be, brother.
Yeah, some of the challenges with COVID and some of the other things have sort of affected the membership, I'm sure. But it sounds like you've done good work in the community as well. You've definitely left your mark on both the religion and on the community as well.
You know, man, I was 9 years old. I was in an O'Neill's department store in Akron, Ohio, on Howard Street. This is the upper Howard Street, not the lower Howard Street where I lived. Ran into 3 nuns. It was me, my 2 brothers, and a guy named Tony. 3 nuns, and they stopped us. We running through the store like little kids do, 8, 9-year-old kids. We running through the store. Clearly no parental guidance. That was unheard of back in that day, brother. But we broke loose out of our community, went to O'Neill's, man, and those 3 nuns accosted us, if you will. And one of the nuns asked us each our names: Tony, Donald, Dale. Those Donald and Dale, my 2 younger brothers, twin brothers. And then, what's your name? Mark. She looked at me. She stopped. She said, "Mark, do you know what that name means?" I said, "No, ma'am," because back then we called everybody man. You're supposed to make a difference. You are supposed to leave a mark. That obviously never left my memory.
Yeah.
And so it's not as if I've always intentionally tried to do that, but in some sense, I have tried to live into that name. So that name means, for instance, you know, my brother Philip named me. That was my 3rd oldest brother. He named me Mark quote unquote Allison Lomax. He gave me the name Allison because at that time they would call out your whole name in school, and he knew that once the teacher said Allison, I had to put these up every doggone day to fight the brothers back because now they want to call me a girl, right? And so I was going to be tough. I had to learn how to use these. He was right about that. But that piece about Mark, that never left me. And so, yeah, I have always tried to offer the best of my service to the community, brother. And I made sacrifices like you can't believe for the sake of the community. I worked at First Africa for 17 years without a raise. My students, I also am a seminary professor. My teachers, my students come out of seminary at that time making more money than their professor, working 2 jobs full time. Because I never pushed the congregation to care about me. I pushed the congregation to care about themselves and the community. At some point, it made no sense because one of my colleagues says, you know, you're making it hard on the next pastor. Because if you don't claim, if you don't get what's due you now, they won't pay the next pastor any money. They won't treat that next pastor right. So you got to do it. So I did it in 2015. But anyhow, yeah, that's the long and short.
So what's next for you coming up in retirement, and what do you want your legacy to be?
Well, in retirement, I think I've already left a legacy. First African it is. It's a signature of my ministry. But I was in academia for 26 years. I taught preaching at the Interdenominational Theological Center, historically Black theological seminary, one of 5 in the whole nation. And I developed during the course of that ministry this idea of Afrocentric Christian ministry, defining what it means to be Afrocentric in a Christian tradition, and how you begin to spell that out theologically. I want to write about that.
Could you sort of explain what that means to us real quick?
Really quick is you're doing the same thing with the philosophical concept of Afrocentricity theologically as you do with it personally. You center Africa. So as you come to the consideration of who God is, as you begin to talk about who God is, then you ask, where am I in that? In a sense, you're asking, so where is the African in that? Where's the African inclusion? So these ideas that have formulated about the being that we call God, which by the way comes out of a Germanic linguistic tradition, exclude everybody outside of that Germanic/European tradition. How does one include oneself in that? In terms of your people, your ancestors? Well, you begin now to investigate the spiritualities of the people of Africa. How did they talk about the divine, the Holy Spirit? How did they envision? How did they perform the religion on the stage of human history? What meaning were lay in back of their religious, quote unquote, their religious languages? Right? How did they, this whole idea of holiness, for an example, how does that show up in African spiritual communities and religious communities? Well, in African religious communities, there's no such thing as sacred and secular. There's no bifurcation between, what's in the flesh and what's in the spirit. It all is. Right. So it's endemic to being person. And so one of the things that Europeans do is they separate, they isolate, they divide, they conquer. Africans do exactly the opposite. So how do you weave that into a Christian understanding, or a Christian understanding of what it means to be a follower of Christ? So you look for those kinds of notions in the teachings of Moses, in the teachings of Jesus, in the teachings of Paul. Do they exist? And if they don't, can you invest them with those kinds of notions? That's exactly what white people have done. They have invested in Paul and in Jesus and in Moses ideas that come out of European philosophical notions, right? So we just want to reverse, what's the word? Reverse mechanical.
Reverse engineer?
Yeah, that's the word. Reverse engineer that process and say, there's got to be a place for us in this. And there is. When you say, after all, when you say the people of Israel spent 400 years in Egypt, well, where is Egypt, by the way?
That was my next question.
And how could they live 400 years in Egypt and be untouched by Egyptian religious understanding and conceptualizations of deity? So you begin to investigate the Hebrew. You see the relationship between the Hebrew and what we call the hieroglyphs. You see the relationship between the characterization of Yahweh and Elohim in the Hebrew text and the characterizations of Amun and Ra in the Kemetic text, right? And then you begin to announce those and you begin to teach those, you begin to write about those. So that's what the writing is going to be about. I'm doing some deep work on these profound and powerful connections. I've done this work and I'm doing this work in my teaching and preaching right now. That's what's compelling about First African. And it's not all philosophical and theological either. It's about how now that you know this, then how does one become the embodiment? How does one begin to live these principles out in the world? Because it means nothing if it cannot be clothed in flesh and blood, right?
As we've been talking, I've been thinking about this whole conversation around a Black Jesus, or is it important to put a color on Jesus or on God? How do you sort of balance the notion that Jesus was maybe Black with?
Well, let me say, first of all, God is spirit.
That's understood.
You don't color spirits.
That's understood. Yeah, I understand that.
Yeah. So spirit is spirit,
Right.
We talk about spirit.
And that all humans are equal, basically. Yeah, I understand that.
Yeah, and God is in, under, and with is the language I use.
Okay.
Everything and everybody. The South African people have this whole idea that Jan Hynes Johns presents to us in the book Moon 2. But the word there is into NTU is in everything that exists, every understanding, every space, every time. Into, that's who I would call God. But
okay.
From a linguistic perspective. Now with Jesus was allegedly a person of history.
Okay. So that's not really significant to the story, then you're saying his color necessarily.
It is important.
Oh, it is
because
important.
He's a person of history.
Okay.
And what we know is that at that time in history, his people came up out of Egypt into a place called Canaan. And those people were your skin color, brother.
Oh,
they
yes.
may have not been as dark as me, but they surely, many of them were as dark as you. So he can't be a quote unquote white man. He has to have been at least minimally a tan man, a brown man, minimally. And his mama was too. And the people around him were too. And he was a brown-skinned, oppressed man because of the work and the activity of the Roman government on the one hand, and the Jewish temple on the other. So people who came out of his social-economic milieu were oppressed by the powers that be. So this is a brown man talking about God in the jaws of oppression. And the oppression came from the political, economic, military dictatorship or empire of the day, as well as from the religious performance of the priests and the elders of the temple. So in that matrix, he began to formulate a way of being with God, of poor people understanding what it meant to walk with God.
Right. It's a really powerful conversation that we're having here.
Thank you, sir.
So how do you help I know you've had the ministry work, you're writing the book. What else what else are you trying to do to further this message?
Well, the book writing is important. Everybody's asking for it. Colleagues are asking for it, both in the academy as well as in the congregations. All of my former students and many of my present ones say, man, where's the book? Where's the book? Where's the book? Members of the congregation, man, come on now. Yeah, but working 2 full-time jobs for 26 years, really, come on now.
Gotcha. I
just couldn't get to it. So that's important. The other piece of the retirement is for me, bro.
Yep.
I do overlanding. I get in my 4-wheel drive truck and I drive across the country, camping, hiking, fishing, enjoying nature.
Yep.
You know what I'm saying? That's what I do, bro. In fact, I'm leaving tomorrow doing that same thing. I'm gonna be out for the rest of the week, brother, camping in the North Georgia mountains, listen to birds sing. And I will have my I can't, what do they call this thing? My remarkable tablet with me as I write.
To write your thoughts, write your inspirations.
Yeah. I'll do a significant amount of writing as I travel. And of course, I always travel with my handy Kindle where most of my books are that I'm reading right now. I have a pervasive library here, but I do use Kindle quite a bit. So I'm always working, brother. That's my problem. I'm always working.
Well, I appreciate you taking some time to share your story with me. So I have a couple questions. We call this the hot seat now, where I ask a few rapid fire questions to all my guests. What would be your definition of what an awakening is? A spiritual awakening.
An awakening, a spiritual awakening is a profound aha moment that bubbles from the inside out. That bubble begins on the inside, this sense of becoming aware of who one is in relation to other ones, who one is in relation to the Most High, who one is in terms of one's purpose and the way one moves in the world. That's the awakening. And that's the piece that most people get. They never get to that place of awakening where they become aware of their purpose in life.
Okay, very good. Next question is, what's the most valuable lesson you've learned in life so far?
In what?
What's the most valuable lesson have you learned in life? What's the most valuable life lesson have you learned?
It is important for me to show up as who I understand myself to be. That is vitally important because who I am has significance in relation to others. And who they are has significance in relation to me. So it's important for me not to put on airs, but to show up for who I know myself to be.
Okay, great. Last question is, what would be your advice to anyone who's going through a spiritual awakening?
Hold on, because it's a rough ride. Spiritual awakening is not a difficult path, which is why I think most people do everything they can to get away from it. It's hold on, and you have to have faith in the path. That they have to have faith that there are essences, deity, and ancestors who are with you on that path.
Great. I appreciate all your answers. I have to say, you're the first clergy person that I've had on this channel, so I do appreciate you for sharing your thoughts.
Well, thank you for having me. I appreciate that, brother.
We'll talk to you soon, brother.
All right. God bless you, man.